Hi friends, my name's Trish Roberts and you're watching Faint Signals from Vega. So I've been talking privately to somebody online about the Israel-Palestine situation and trying to convey to him exactly what it is, and also giving like a sort of a situation where imagine this happening to you and how you'd feel about it. And this person sort of doesn't seem to be able to grasp it. I've invited him to speak to an independent journalist friend of mine who has broad knowledge about it, and a few other people. Who knows if he will get it or if he wants to get it, I don't know. So, but anyway, I wanted to share with you, for those of you who may not be looking at this Palestine-Israel situation and they're just hearing a whole lot of stuff, which probably, if it's from the corporate mainstream media, you can guarantee that it's propaganda, and if it's from government, it's the same thing. So unless you've been watching independent journalism, you probably don't really haven't really got a good understanding of it, a good grasp of it, or a real grasp of it. So as I said to this person privately, now I'm a bit clumsy at this, okay? I'm not great on chronology and all that sort of thing and dates, but I'm going to give just a general overall idea of what exactly is going on there. And hopefully you'll be able to sort of get a little bit of an idea of why it's so important for us to support the Palestinians. Because, just to put it briefly, it's a genocide and it's an occupation. So this is what I sort of said to this fellow who I was speaking to. I said, imagine if, for example, you were living, say, in Florida, and Florida was a country, and you'd been living there, your relatives, and had been living there for generations and generations, thousands of years, in fact. And this is documented in various literature, and it's documented. So, if one is looking at it realistically, it's unmistakable. It's not debatable whether Florida as a country exists or has existed for a long time, and that the people of Florida, Floridians, the indigenous people of Florida, the country, have existed for thousands of years as well. Okay, so this is just a hypothetical, just say. So that's just say that's a historical fact. Then early in the 20th century, a imperialist colonizing country, and we'll say Britain, because this is what happened, Britain, decided to give away your country of Florida to some other people from another country. And initially it was supposedly supposed to be, that they could come and live there with you. Of course, why anybody thinks it's okay for another country like Britain to say, here, you can have part of Florida. It's not Britain's job or whatever to give away Florida, the country, to, say, for example, Cuba. Let's say, for sake of argument, Cuba and Cubans were the country and the people who Britain had given, who had invited to Florida to live. So this is basically, this is just imagine if you lived in Florida. Florida was a country. You'd been living there for your family had been living there for generations. There was heaps and, many generations of people for thousands of years. The whole country of Florida had its own, so it was an indigenous population, and then another country, an imperialist colonizing country, says, gives your country basically away to say Cuba and Cubans. Just imagine that. So anyway, I'll just continue with this hypothetical. So then the Cubans, the group of people that Britain had given Florida, the country, away to, then come in and start to drive out the indigenous people, the indigenous Floridians, and kill as many as possible, drive them out, and gradually start to take over the country by killing the indigenous populations. Just like what happened in the US when colonizers came over and were rounding up and killing indigenous peoples in the United States. So anyway, so Cuba, just say Cuba for sake of argument, and the Cubans start killing and taking over. Around them, the Western media and the Western governments are all supporting Cuba and Cubans, and turn the other way when there's any violence. And so there's no reporting about it. So, sort of imagine that. So, you're basically being killed, and it's like a slow genocide, and everybody's looking the other way because they have a stake in it, The government has a stake in it, so do the Western media, and so forth. So then, then you have, imagine, you have your home, and, your families have homes, etc., and they've had these homes for a long time. Imagine finding under a rock a note saying, we are taking over your house, it's going to be bulldozed soon, you have a week to get out. Imagine finding a note under a rock, and whether or not that note gets blown away, it's irrelevant. That's still going to happen. Imagine how you'd feel, and then, then the Cubans come with bulldozers, and if you're in the house, you're in trouble, and they just bulldoze down your house. And they keep doing that to your neighbors, and it happens by the hundreds of people's homes that you're friends of, or your family is related to, or whatever, all get these little notes under rocks, and then they just come in and bulldoze your home and take it over, and you're homeless. So that's what's happening every day to Palestinians. Okay, so let's just say, let's keep going on with the sort of hypothetical about the country of Florida and the Cubans. Okay, so that's just one thing that's happening. So imagine also if Cuban settlers who are doing this, to make sure that you get out of the home, they throw, for example, which is what happened to one Palestinian family, they throw a Molotov cocktail into your home, and they end up burning alive one of your relatives' families, and only one child survives with burns. That's what happened to a family last year. That's not uncommon. And that's what is done by settlers, Israeli settlers, to Palestinians if they don't get out of their home. Oh, and they also get constantly harassed until they're, either driven out, or there's a, conflict like that where they try and kill them. And this is all done, we'll go back to Cuba and Florida, this is all done with the complete okay of the Cuban government, which is now sort of taken over and has an army, an occupying force, and this is all done with the complicity of the government and the occupying army, and the other Cubans, most of the other Cubans living in that country. And if a Cuban has a problem with it, then they are harassed and treated like a pariah. And imagine if, you know, your children are going off to, you know, your children cannot go down to the beach because it's a restricted area. Only Cubans can go to that area. So Floridians are forbidden from going to certain areas, and if they have to go to other areas, they have to go a certain way, like down certain areas that are allocated for Floridians, that are forbidden to travel on roads that are only for Cubans. And if you travel on roads that are only for Cubans, you'll probably be shot and killed, or you might go up to a checkpoint. And if the Cuban army, occupational army, decides that you are a bit suspect, they shoot and kill you. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can be a child, you know, a 7-year-old, a 16-year-old. Shooting and killing Floridian children is normal. And it's not, people aren't prosecuted. Similar to killing black people in the United States is acceptable, and police are really never prosecuted. So that's what's happening, you know, just say in our hypothetical situation, that's what happens to Floridians. The children are harassed. Imagine your children being harassed regularly by Cuban occupational forces, and that they are randomly shot and killed in the street while they're playing, or they're arrested at 3 in the morning and taken to be interrogated and sometimes detained for 6 months. These are children. Imagine that, what else? Imagine that, you know, the Cubans put out a curfew, and you have to be at a certain place at that time of curfew, and if you aren't, you're killed. Or if they want to take, the Cuban army, occupational army, want to take over your house for a while and use it as a base, they just go in there and tell you to get out, and you have to find somewhere else to be, and they can occupy it for as long as they like using it. Imagine that imagine that there is blockades of supplies because you can't get the same sort of access to food that Cubans can, and that Cubans actually block supplies from in the ports, and they actually attack fishermen. You know, I'm a vegan, so I'm not into eating animal products, but let's just say in this hypothetical, which is what I'm talking about with Palestine and Israel, just say, you know, people are wanting to bring in food, or there's flotillas that are trying to get food to Floridians, and they're attacked or they're blocked. And in fact, the Cuban government, you know, in this occupation of Florida, the country, is actually trying to restrict calories to Floridian children and Floridians in general. So they're trying to restrict, you know, calories to these children, kind of starve them in a way. Imagine that. Imagine you have children and this is what's happening. And so basically you're not safe in your home. You don't know when they will bulldoze your home and build something else and you lose it altogether. You can go on peaceful protests and they can shoot you or continually fire canister after canister of tear gas, sometimes aiming at you to hit you in the chest or the head, which has killed people. Imagine that. Or they supposedly use what they call, rubber bullets. Rubber bullets are really just steel with a very, very thin coating of rubber. They're lethal, oftentimes they're lethal, and in the case of, I'll just abandon this hypothetical now. In the case of Ahed Tamimi, who is, I've spoken about 2 videos ago, 2 or 3 videos ago, she was, I think it was her cousin or her brother, no, it was her cousin, was peering over the fence and was shot in the face with a so-called rubber bullet, and he was in a coma for a while. It was in a terrible state, really. I think he's recovered, but you know, there's a deformity there, and of course the trauma of that. And after that happened, Ahed Tamimi confronted the Israeli soldier who did that, and he slapped her, and she slapped him back, and then they arrested her in the middle of the night, the following day, and about 3 in the morning, and that's very common for Israeli occupational forces, to arrest children in the middle of the night. And so Ahed Tamimi's family, she's a young, you know, she's only 16, she's only a young Palestinian girl. Her whole family have been sort of terrorized because they do peaceful protests every week in their village. And you know, she's had, in the beginning of 2018, in fact, her 17-year-old cousin was killed and by Israeli forces, and you know, she's had numerous family members killed. You know, it's a sort of a terrorizing of the Palestinians, and it's completely fine. It's seen as completely acceptable. So, you know, the whole beginnings of this, you know, a country, Britain giving away Palestine to a group of Israeli people, that was wrong right off the start. It wasn't Britain's to give away, even though they were an imperialist colonizer. It wasn't theirs to give away in the first place. So it started very badly. And I mean, if you can just imagine living in you know, having that happen to you, we need to try and imagine this happening to us ourselves, how we would feel if we were living in a country and some other country gave our country away to other people, and then those people started driving us out and killing us in a slow genocide. And to the point now where it's an apartheid situation. It's worse than apartheid was at the height of South Africa apartheid. Worse, way worse. And if we have any trust at all, like Noam Chomsky has talked about this frequently, and he's also talked about, he's written a book, he wrote a book with, I can't remember his name now. It's just on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, I think it was called On Palestine. It's just a small book. It's a good book. And Noam Chomsky has talked about this awful situation for Palestinians for a while. Ilan Papp is another one. Max Blumenthal has written a book, Goliath. There's, you know, Chris Hedges has talked about it. He's suggested that we join the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement against Israeli goods, Israeli businesses, to do what was done to South Africa during the apartheid years. That's how economic sanctions, etc., ended. A boycott, divestment movement against South Africa ended the apartheid situation there. And unfortunately, it seems that that's what it takes to address this. You have to address it economically. So Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize recipient, has advocated people, you know, sort of join this boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. But you know, I'll put a link to some people who you can, you know, look at their, you know, look at the information they provided about this. And I invite you to watch any of the Empire Files programs on Palestine, and there's about 5 or 6 of them now, and they're really excellent. There's one, if you want to know how Palestine became colonized, it's actually called The Empire Files, How Palestine Became Colonized. And there's another one with an ex-IDF soldier, Israeli Defense Force soldier, who talks about how he realized he was a terrorist. It's a really insightful program by The Empire Files by Abby Martin and Michael Preisner, interviewing this ex-IDF soldier. There's a group called Break the Silence, and they're ex-IDF soldiers who are talking about this. And of course, they have no reason to lie, really, because they become pariahs in their own country. They become pariahs. The IDF soldier is a pariah with a lot of Israelis because, sadly, unfortunately, there's been such tremendous racism in that country particularly by the right-wing Likud government led by Netanyahu, but it's been for a very long time now, decades and decades. Palestinians have been otherized and demonized and dehumanized for so long that a lot of the Israeli public just sort of think that they're quote-unquote animals. That's what otherization does. It reduces people to to a state where you can do whatever you want to them. That's what discrimination does. And that's what's happened to the Palestinians. They've basically seen, and let's not forget that Arab Jews in Israel are also demonized. And to be able to exist securely in Israel, they have to become extremely nationalistic. And also Somalis, any black people that are trying to seek asylum in Israel are demonized too, and they're treated as second-class citizens. So they have developed now into a sort of a white supremacist society. So it's not just Palestinians that are sort of treated, but who are treated appallingly. But they are, Palestinians are the group that they are conducting an ongoing genocide. So, I'll just think about this for a moment. In a 2-week period in Gaza, which is an outdoor prison, basically. It's a very small area of land, and it has about 1 million or so, a couple of million Palestinians there. And they can't really go anywhere. And every so often, the Israeli government call it mowing the grass. Mowing the grass, that's what they call it. Every so often they will bomb that area, and claiming that Hamas, which is a group that is not a very effective group, I guess you could say, but they're a group that's fighting back against the against the occupation, which they have every right to do so. Any international law says if you're being occupied, your land is being occupied. Like, I'm not advocating violence, but I'm just saying if you have an occupying army in your country, and the sort of things that are happening to Palestinians is going on, you have every right to defend yourself and fight back. Apparently, it's not okay. It's seen as not okay for Palestinians to fight back. Even throwing rocks, you can get a 20-year sentence, even if you're a child, from throwing rocks. And just recently, the Netanyahu Likud party, right-wing government is trying to introduce the death penalty so that, they can actually sort of execute Palestinians for fighting back. See, this is a sort of absolute, it's just outrageously, it's sort of like, in some ways, they've become, how Israel often goes on about, Israelis go on about, we must never forget what happened, during the Holocaust years, and never let that happen again. Well, sadly, they've almost become what they say they abhor, they claim they abhor. I'm generalizing now, but there's a sadly a huge amount of Israelis now who openly call for death to Palestinians, openly. I mean, that's how rampant and how entrenched. It's extreme racism to the point where they openly call for genocide of Palestinians. And in 2014, in a 2-week period, there was about 550 children were bombed in Gaza. This is part of the mowing the grass that they refer to it, the Israeli government, mowing the grass. 550 children. So what have they got to do with anything, the children? They're just born into that area. And there's a lot of propaganda, lots of propaganda put out by the Israeli government about Palestinians. There's a lot put out by the Western media. The Israeli government literally pays students to edit Wikipedia entries. They give them free balloon rides and sort of enticements to financial enticements to keep. It's called Hasbro, which is like a propaganda about the Israeli state, to keep a good face on it, a good face on a genocide. So they actually pay students to go around and troll when there's ever any discussion about Palestine. So you'll often see anything that's on RT or, anything else about Palestine, if it's ever shown in the reality that it is, you'll often see there'll be a bunch of people come on and spread Hasbro propaganda, just propaganda about Palestinians and argue away and stuff. That's very common. That's how organized they are. And that's why we need to join this BDS movement, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement. And we need to spread real information about Palestine. For example, spread the Empire Files programs about Palestine, and so that people really understand what's happening. I mean, Abby Martin is a journalist that one can trust. She truly is. I'm always a bit skeptical about everyone, every journalist now, every news source, because look at Democracy Now! That went off the rails and started, promoting nonsense about Syria and about Russia, and it can't be fully trusted, but it has some good stuff. And I'm not even that crazy sometimes about the Real News Network, because they often get a guy called Colonel Wilkinson on there, who's got some very interesting insights, because he was some secretary to somebody who worked closely with Colin Powell in the Bush administration, but he still has a kind of a bit of an imperialist bent about him, even though he's then often talking about imperialism in a critical way. It's sort of very confusing. So they have him on, and I'm not sure why. He's interesting on one hand because he has insights into the military and what they're doing, but he's also a little bit of a concern. But anyway, that's why I'm always skeptical about every journalist, news source, etc. But I do trust. There's some people I do trust, like Ben Norton and Abby Martin and Michael Preisner, and I trust. There's various people. Max Blumenthal is excellent on this issue anyway. I think it's a moral imperative that we do our best to spread real information, disseminate real information, and encourage people to join the BDS movement, because that's probably the only way that this terrible, appalling genocide is going to end for Palestinians. they're an amazing people that they're able to endure this. And as they say, existence is resistance. That's about all they can do, because every way of protesting is being vilified, and it's being sort of made into a crime. Even you know, just even peacefully protesting, you can be killed, or at the very least gassed with tear gas, many canisters, and they aim for people, these hard shells of tear gas canisters. I mean, I think one of our head Tamimi's cousins, or I don't know, somebody, I think it was, they were related to our head Tamimi, you know, was shot in the chest with a metal canister. And just recently, about, I don't know, it was a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Ibrahim Abu Turaya, he was a wheelchair-bound Palestinian man, and I've done a vlog about him about two or three videos ago. And he was a very prominent Palestinian activist. He had no legs. He lost his legs in 2008 in an Israeli bombing attack. So he was wheelchair bound, he had no legs, and he used to wash cars for a living, even though he had no legs. It was, you know, he was an amazing person, and he was very, like a real force for activism for Palestinians. And in one of the protests, he was just sitting in his wheelchair, and they shot him in the head. A sniper shot him literally right in the middle of the forehead, and killed him. You know, this is a man that is wheelchair bound, had no ammunition of any kind, no arm, no sort of guns or anything, just sitting in his wheelchair, and he was shot and killed. A deliberate execution. Well, that is common. It's common. You know, this is, and these sort of things never stay in a vacuum. You can see it happening in the US now. You can see things happening in the US. It's tried out in, you know, what happens often in Israel to Palestinians, eventually in some way starts to happen elsewhere. And in fact, you know, there are there are police who have been militarized. A lot of them get their training in Israel. So, you know, not only is it just an immoral situation for Palestinians, and it's appalling, and I don't know how they don't just go insane from the stress of it and from the outrageous injustice. But it's not just this sort of thing doesn't remain in a vacuum. We all are going to suffer the consequences of this appalling occupation and appalling injustice, because as the saying goes, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's a fact. That's why often when I talk about veganism, I talk about our exploitation of non-human animals for food, clothing, entertainment, and other reasons never stays. That sort of violence doesn't stay in a vacuum just toward non-human animals. It never does. These attitudes go out to other things, and they do. So just as a side note, if you're not vegan, please consider going vegan. And I have a site, howtogovegan.org. It'll be the best thing, one of the best things you've ever done, and it's a first step to a non-violent life. So I invite you to check that out, howtogovegan.org. So anyway, I don't know if I explained this very well, but I think the thing to do, and we have to, neoliberalism has managed to destroy communities, it's managed to destroy our ability to organize, it's managed to destroy empathy as well. Empathy is vilified, caring is vilified, compassion is vilified. That's because it's anti-business. You know, it's anti-business to care about others. You know, if to be able to organize threatens corporations. So neoliberalism is anti-people, anti-community, and it must be crushed. It is also driving wars, capitalism is like an insatiable monster, and it has to have a war machine with it so that it can continue on gobbling up countries, resources, the planet. So neoliberalism is an enemy for all of us, and it must be crushed. And we must stand up for any disenfranchised group, the most disenfranchised. That's why I'm vegan, because non-human animals are the most invisible and largest group on the planet that's being exploited and killed for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. It's morally unjustifiable, and also it's destroying the planet. So I am vegan, and I promote vegan education. But then we have, you know, one of the most invisible groups that are being vilified, and the genocide is taking place, and that's Palestinians. So, you know, we have to look for the most, the group that Western media ignores, that Western governments ignore for reasons of profit, you know, because they're benefiting from this. And I won't go into why. You can watch the Empire Files and find out. But, you know, they only have independent journalists and those who follow them to spread the word of what's going on for Palestinians. And we have to end it. We have to end this. And that, and that means joining the BDS campaign. And as I said recently, Lorde, Lorde, she's a singer from New Zealand. She's recently joined the BDS campaign, and she's really got a lot of blowback about it. But you will see more and more entertainers. Roger Waters has been promoting the BDS campaign. There's lots of different performers that are doing so, and it's starting to take off, and it's starting to take off, and Israel is starting to feel the effects of this financial, the constraints that happen through boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So, you know, these things will exponentially take hold, and that's why it's so important to spread information, good information about it, because the rubbish and the propaganda and the Hasbro propaganda is overwhelming at present. So anyway, that's all really I wanted to say. I'll post those various programs, links, so that you can watch them by the Empire Files. And I invite you to watch all of them, and I'll also post a couple of things, one by Norman Finkelstein, and if I can find some others. Please check them out, and then let's act on it, because it's not enough to just know it in ourselves. To change anything, we have to actually do something ourselves. We have to take responsibility and act as if those people are our very close friends and family, because we're all interconnected. Those people are our relatives. They are our brothers and sisters, and they are fellow sentient beings, and we should not allow them to be murdered, their children murdered, to live in fear, not to be safe inside their house, not to be safe outside their house, to be having their homes burned down. We would want other people to come to our aid, wouldn't we? And we have to do what we would want to see done for us. So that's why we must act. We must act. So thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Bega. Till next time, bye for now.